Hello and welcome to Long COVID Families Back to School Conference Day 3. So far in the conference, we shared current research on pediatric long COVID, how to track your child's symptoms, and how to navigate illness. Today, our focus is on the prevention of infection, which is the best way to prevent long COVID. But first, Dr. Megan Fitzgerald will join me in conversation about the latest research on COVID reinfection, which will be followed by a live Q&A with Dr. Fitzgerald. Then this afternoon, Fran Gilmore, an industrial hygienist, will share the science of ventilation and masks. Fran will also be available to answer questions immediately following. Then we will cover the best masks for kids and how to improve fit. We also share how to make a Corsi box. Thank you.
Dr. Megan Fitzgerald is a biologist, researcher, and advocate. She received her PhD in neurology and neuroscience from Weill Cornell Graduate School of Medicine. She is the Reinfections Studies co-lead for Patient-Led Research Collaborative. She's also the scientific advisor for Long COVID Families. Today, she's going to be discussing COVID reinfections.
Hi, and welcome to our presentation on COVID reinfections. My name is Megan Carmelani, and I'm the founder and president of Long COVID Families. With us today, we have Dr. Megan Fitzgerald. Megan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm Megan Fitzgerald. I have a PhD in neuroscience and neurology, and I'm a long COVID patient. My life and my career were interrupted in March of 2020 when I contracted COVID and subsequently long COVID, which got me involved with the Patient-Led Research Coalition on COVID-19. So that's my story.
Thank you. All right, so Megan's kind enough to join us today to answer a series of questions about reinfections. All right, thank you, Megan. So let's start with, can you explain how we've become immune to different viruses, either through vaccines or through gaining natural immunity due to infection?
Sure. The first time our bodies encounter a new virus that we've never seen before, we rely on something called our innate immune system to fight it off. This is a very inflammatory response that's pretty non-specific. However, that first infection creates a memory in our immune system, so that the next time we encounter the same pathogen, our immune system is ready to fight it in a much more specific and efficient way, even neutralizing this threat sometimes before we experience any symptoms. Our immune memory is a pretty amazing thing. Some of the cells responsible for creating this immune response are even called memory cells, memory T cells and memory B cells, which help produce antibodies. Immune memory is actually first described thousands of years ago during the plague of Athens, when it was written that those who became ill but survived the first wave of the plague could care for people who became ill in subsequent waves without becoming sick themselves. And thankfully, in more modern times, we've learned to harness the power of immune memory using vaccines. So we don't even have to become ill to develop immunity to some really dangerous diseases. Unfortunately, the reason that we're having this panel here today on COVID reinfection is because COVID is escaping this powerful component of our immune systems. And unlike with many other viruses, we aren't fully immune after infection or after vaccinations.
Might I ask a clarifying question? So just to be clear, so when we say somebody is immune or we have immunity, do we mean that we cannot get the virus, or there's different levels of immunity?
There's different levels of immunity.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And for COVID, we do not have full broad immunity.
Exactly. For something, I'll use the measles as an example. After you get measles or you get a measles vaccination, you have something called sterilizing immunity. So you're fully immune. You don't have symptoms of the disease and you can't pass on the disease anymore. With COVID, that's not the case.
I see. Okay. So then you can get COVID more than once.
Yes, you can absolutely get COVID more than once, and reinfections are becoming increasingly common.
Okay. And this is true even if you're vaccinated or boosted?
Yeah, unfortunately, even people who've been vaccinated and boosted can get COVID and can get it more than once. You can also spread COVID even if you've been vaxxed and boosted. The vaccines did an excellent job when they were first developed, protecting against infection from the ancestral strain of COVID, which was the first variant of the virus that we experienced during the spring of 2020. Vaccines reduced the chance that you'd catch this virus during this time, experience any symptoms at all, and they even reduced the chance that you could spread COVID. But then in the Delta wave, we had vaccines plus the booster shots still provided good protection from symptomatic illness from COVID. But now in the Omicron era, it's pretty common to become ill with COVID, even if you've been vaxxed and boosted on schedule. And vaccines still provide a degree of protection from severe disease. So going back to your question, we have some immunity to it. But it's obviously important, but they don't prevent us from experiencing symptoms of COVID or from spreading COVID to other people.
So can you explain why do COVID reinfections happen? And how is it escaping our immune memory?
The main problem is that COVID is evolving to escape our immune memory. The virus has a component called the spike protein, and this spike protein is the key to the virus invading the cells in our bodies. Mutations in the spike protein can make the virus less recognizable to our immune system. So you can imagine like our immune systems are security guards to our body, and they're trained to recognize a specific person. And now imagine that person grows a beard, puts on a wig and hat and sunglasses, and at the same time gets better at sneaking past the security guards. And metaphorically speaking, of course, this is what COVID is doing really well. The virus is circulating at high levels in our society, and because of this, it has plenty of chances to mutate into variants that are better able to escape our immune memory.
So early on in the pandemic, we heard a lot about herd immunity. So is it possible? Can we achieve herd immunity from COVID? And how does that compare to other diseases?
So herd immunity is the idea that we as a population can become immune to a disease, and this will stop the spread of the disease. Herd immunity can be achieved either through infection or through vaccination. And herd immunity is a pretty amazing thing. It can even protect vulnerable people, because when the majority of a population is immune, even if the vulnerable people can't themselves mount a great immune response, herd immunity can stop the viruses from circulating in the population, so it protects the vulnerable as well. So that's why in the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of politicians were hopeful that, once enough people contracted COVID and they recovered from it, we would achieve herd immunity, and that would stop COVID and protect the vulnerable. But unfortunately, COVID is just not behaving that way. And we've stopped a lot of other dangerous diseases with herd immunity, and we got there safely through vaccination, including measles, mumps, whooping cough, diphtheria, and some others. But I'll say we don't have herd immunity to everything, every virus. We don't get immunity to the common cold, which is caused by the 4 circulating coronaviruses that we had prior to COVID, despite the fact that we are repeatedly exposed to these viruses. These coronaviruses that cause the common cold, they're cousins to COVID-19, and like COVID-19, they dodge our immune defenses, and we can be infected and reinfected with them time and again, even though they're much less harmful than COVID-19 on our bodies. So not every virus can be stopped through herd immunity following natural infection. And unfortunately for us, the coronavirus family seems to be pretty adept at evading our immune defenses.
Okay. So then how common is it to get COVID more than once?
That's a really hard question to answer because reinfections are not being tracked systemically, but I can confidently say that COVID reinfections are fairly common.
Yeah, follow-up question to that, would you necessarily know you've been reinfected unless you were tested, right?
Yeah, you might not know because you can have an asymptomatic or a very mild asymptomatic reinfection.
Okay. Sorry, I touched my screen and it went too far. So then, are the second and third infections of COVID possibly milder though?
So this is a narrative that I'm seeing in the media right now, but it's not always the case.
Okay.
One of the earliest studies that were published on COVID reinfections back in December of 2020 showed that second infections with COVID could be more serious than the first infections. They could be less serious. It was basically just a roll of the dice, whether the infection was more serious or not. But at that point of the pandemic, reinfections, even though they could be serious, were very rare, both because we were taking collective measures as a society to mitigate the spread of COVID, and because we didn't yet have the super contagious immune evasive variants that we're dealing with today. So the early data that was showing that reinfections were rare, but that previous infections with the virus didn't do a great job at lessening the severity of the reinfection. But the landscape today looks different. We have vaccinations and boosters that absolutely mitigate the severity of infections, and we're in the Omicron era. We know that the Omicron variants are thankfully less likely to cause severe complications in the acute phase of the disease than the viral variants that came before. And so I know that today a lot of pundits and public health professionals are saying that reinfections are generally milder than the first infection, but I think it's still an open question as to whether this is due to the milder variants that are currently circulating. For example, if you had a Delta infection and then an Omicron infection, the Delta infection might have been more severe as a property of the virus, whether not because the Omicron was the reinfection, it's just that Omicron is a more mild virus. Or whether the more mild reinfections we're seeing are due to the milder variants plus vaccinations and boosters, or whether all of these are contributing factors. The other thing that you need to keep in mind with this question is how badly people were impacted by their first COVID infection. COVID is a potentially severe virus, and even a mild first infection can leave people with worsened pre-existing conditions or with new health conditions like long COVID, which can include problems ranging from brain fog to heart and lung conditions and new autoimmune diseases. So if someone develops these conditions following a first COVID infection, a second COVID infection can impact them quite severely. So I would say COVID infections are not always more mild than first infection.
Okay. So then are there long-term consequences just simply from being reinfected?
There seem to be, at least for some people. A large study was conducted and released earlier this month using data from the VA hospital system. And for people who aren't familiar, the VA, or Veterans Affairs system, provides healthcare to many of America's veterans. This study looked at the health records of about 250,000 people who had one COVID infection and about 35,000 people who had been reinfected with COVID, sometimes multiple times. And they found that the people who were reinfected, so they had 2 or more COVID infections, had twice the risk of dying of any cause, as well as twice the risk of heart and lung problems, as compared to the group that had only been infected with COVID one time. And with each reinfection, the risks grew larger. So the reinfected population also had higher risks of long COVID symptoms like fatigue and digestive issues. This study's been criticized somewhat because the population it looked at was mostly older, over 60 years old, and male, because this is the population that the VA hospital system principally serves. So some critics have wondered if these findings would apply to younger people, but I don't think anyone can really argue with the take-home message of this study, which is that it's better to avoid reinfection.
Okay, so what it sounds like is that there's likely, or possibly at least, a compound effect. Is that an accurate way to say it? Because I've heard it described that way. And then I've heard that debated. So just wanted to clarify that.
I don't think we have quite the data to show that,
Okay.
but it could also be a compounding effect in some people and not in other people. So there's unique individual vulnerabilities to this that, we don't know what's causing that at this point.
Okay, but bottom line, it's good to avoid reinfection.
Yeah.
Okay. So then are kids at risk for COVID reinfection?
Yes, children are at risk from reinfection from COVID. I mean, children have great immune systems and they're at lower risk for severe complications from acute COVID infection, at least when compared to adults and elderly people. But because we send our kids to schools and because most schools have dropped COVID mitigation measures, kids are frequently becoming reinfected, sometimes within quite a short time frame, only a couple of months, sometimes with only a couple of weeks.
Wow. Okay. So what is the risk of developing long COVID from COVID reinfections versus the first infection? So if we've had COVID once and didn't develop long COVID, then am I good? Am I in the clear?
We don't have the data yet on the risk of this happening. It's definitely happened to some people where they've recovered successfully from their first bout with the virus, and then a subsequent infection left them struggling with symptoms of long COVID. But I don't have data on what the odds are of this happening, and I don't think anyone does right now. But basically, while it's great if you recover quickly from a first bout with COVID, there's no guarantee that you're not going to develop long COVID on a subsequent infection.
Okay. So then the best thing is just to avoid reinfection or infection generally, but to definitely avoid reinfection. So then my next question would be, do masks, which would help with that, actually harm natural immunity though, by preventing exposure to viruses?
So natural immunity to other viruses that are circulating. Yeah. There's really no evidence that masks can somehow have a bad impact on our immune systems or long-term health. As a matter of fact, Japanese people routinely wear face masks to prevent the spread of diseases and have done so before COVID, and they have the longest life expectancy of any country in the world. And regarding exposure to viruses, and speaking, as a mother right now as well, my son attended kindergarten last year in a public school in Philadelphia. He wore his mask. He did a fantastic job wearing it. And although his mask wearing prevented us from getting COVID and the flu, he still picked up a lot of other viruses that were going around, colds, bronchitis, and probably because this was spread on surfaces. And masks only protect against the spread of airborne illnesses like COVID. So kids have plenty of other chances to get exposed to viruses and bacteria, especially if they're in a congregate setting like a school or a daycare classroom. And if we want to boost kids' immune systems and their microbiomes, there's a lot of healthy ways to do this. You can expose them to healthy bacteria, like in yogurt, keep them up to date with their vaccines, feed them a healthy diet with some homegrown, ideally, or locally grown fruit and vegetables, play outside, get a pet, don't use antibiotics unless you really need to. These are kind of all proven ways that we can look after our kids' immune systems. Exposing kids to COVID doesn't boost their immune systems. Contracting COVID, even for kids, can be really dangerous. We have a kind of a pervasive myth in America that if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. And that's really not the case with dangerous diseases, including not only COVID, but other viruses like the measles as well. And these viruses can actually weaken our immune system. So it's worth doing what we can to protect our kids and our families right now. And that includes masking.
Okay. So my next question is, I've heard the term, multiple hit theory. So what do we mean by multiple hit theory of post-infectious illness? And how does that apply to long COVID?
The multi-hit hypothesis of chronic disease speculates that genetic or environmental factors can prime the pump, so to speak, to make someone more vulnerable to developing a post-infectious illness like long COVID. So these environmental factors can include anything that places significant stress on the body, and that includes past exposure to other viruses. We don't know yet whether COVID reinfection can in and of itself be that multiple hit combination that contributes to long COVID, but that large VA study that I was just talking about suggests that it might be.
Okay. So along with that, I'm hearing then that COVID can actually reactivate viruses. What does that mean? And what's the difference between a reinfection and a reactivation?
A reinfection is a new infection with the same disease. And that's what's happening with COVID. So that's what we've been talking about so far. Okay. And a reactivation is when a virus lies dormant in the body after an infection and people can become symptomatic again, usually after a certain trigger. And COVID can be that trigger, causing latent viruses in the body to become active again. The two most common viruses that are being reported being reactivated following COVID are mono, or Epstein-Barr, and herpes zoster, which causes chickenpox and shingles. So some people who have had a COVID infection and are recovering are suddenly faced with the symptoms of mono and shingles, because those viruses have become reactivated. Those are both viruses that lay dormant in the body because after we're infected with mono or chickenpox, we never really clear these viruses from our bodies. And when they're reactivated, they can lead to symptoms of that disease. And it's a topic of active research to determine how much viral reactivation contributes to long COVID and ME/CFS.
So is there anything we can really do to prevent reinfections?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for now, what we need to do collectively is to take actions to slow the spread of this virus. And this includes the tried and true methods we all used in the beginning of the pandemic, like social distancing and masking and testing and quarantining when we're sick. And I know we're all tired of doing this, right? But the Omicron family of COVID variants is just so contagious. And so when we're masking, it's worth investing in higher quality masks like the N95s or KN95s, or for kids, the KF94s, especially when you're in an indoor situation where other people aren't wearing masks. We need to be pushing urgently for better ventilation in indoor public spaces like schools, and hold gatherings outside whenever feasible. Even though it's still possible to contract Omicron outdoors, the likelihood of transmission is very much decreased. And that's what we're shooting for here, just decrease spread. We can't stop it entirely at this point, but we can really decrease the spread and decrease the chances that we'll be reinfected with COVID.
So do you think we're going to end up masking forever?
I hope not. But I do think we need more tools to fight this virus before we can stop routinely masking indoors. And we really need to push our elected officials to invest in developing these tools. For instance, there's pan-coronavirus vaccines that are being researched that should work better against the multiple variants of COVID-19, as well as nasal vaccines that could potentially do a better job creating mucosal immunity, so stopping the virus before it can really invade our bodies, and can possibly better protect us from infection. But the development of this new generation of vaccines just doesn't have the resources or the urgency that was put into Operation Warp Speed to develop the first generation of COVID vaccinations. So I do hope, with these advancements, we'll be able to eventually truly safely get back to normal.
So thank you for that. And then at the beginning, when you introduced yourself, you told us you were a part of patient-led. Can you tell me more about what patient-led is doing to study COVID reinfection?
Yeah, so I'm working with patient-led on a research project to study the impact of reinfections on long COVID. And we're going to be conducting survey-based research in the patient community. We've recently received funding from BALVI, from the BALVI Fund, and we're in the study design phase of our reinfection study. We'd love to hear from the patient community. What questions surrounding reinfection are the most important to you and your family and your community? What do you think we should be looking at? Our team's email address is team@patientledresearch.com. So, feel free to get back to us if you have thoughts on this.
Great. All right, Megan, thank you for sitting with me today and answering.
Fran Gilmore is an industrial hygienist. She's a former high school biology teacher who studied industrial hygiene and workplace health and safety in graduate school. She recently produced info sheets on school and workplace ventilation for the People's CDC, as well as materials on respiratory protection for COVID. Today, Fran will be discussing ventilation and masks.
Okay. I just want to say I am absolutely delighted to be here today and thank the Long COVID Families Group for their wonderful work on this presentation. And those of you who are here or who are going to see this recorded later. So I'm going to share my screen and get going. Okay. Okay, so as Gretchen said, the topic is protecting children from COVID-19 in schools with ventilation and masks. So as I'm sure everybody knows at this point, COVID-19 virus is airborne and people are infected primarily, almost totally, by inhaling virus from other people. That means protecting children requires minimizing viruses in the air in the school. So there's 3 types of protections that we can do this with. And the 2 most important are the topic of this talk, ventilations and masks. Distance can help some, but without ventilation and masks, it's actually minimal or completely negligible, certainly not enough. So this diagram will elaborate a little bit more on how COVID-19 spreads in the air. When somebody coughs, sneezes, screams, or sings, they emit larger particles that come from the tubes coming down from the nose down to the lungs with a lot of mucus. So you get big, heavy particles, and they tend to travel about 6 feet under most conditions before they fall to the ground. And they fall just by gravity because they're heavy. But much smaller particles come from talking or just from breathing. And we call those aerosols. And you can see the small light ones in the picture traveling all the way towards another person, all the way through the room. These spread widely, and without ventilation, they can stay in the air for hours. They just hang there because they're so light. One way to think of it is like cigarette smoke. If you have cigarette smoke in a room that doesn't have airflow going through it, it's just going to spread out in the air and stay. And it's exactly what the aerosols do. So how do we get rid of them? Well, ventilation is a big one. So we'll look at that a little more closely. So ventilation removes pollutants in 2 ways. It dilutes them with fresh air, virus or other pollutants, and it can filter pollutants from the air. And we'll talk a little bit about both methods. Schools tend to have 1 or more of these 3 types of ventilation, if they have any ventilation. Some have none. Windows, if they open, do provide fresh air and can reduce the virus under some conditions. An HVAC system, or heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system, can be very helpful, but my understanding is that very few schools actually have them or have functional ones going to the classrooms. More common in the urban schools, at least where I am near Philly, the schools have old unit ventilators in each classroom. And they're a single unit in the classroom that's really aimed at heating and cooling and might filter a teeny weeny bit, but not enough. So we'll talk about we'll talk about windows and unit ventilators, and I might skip HVAC mostly because they're so uncommon in schools. So first, looking at windows, as I said, they help to dilute the virus and any other pollutants with fresh air if they open, of course. But they do have serious limitations. One, there's no filtration in them. They obviously, air just coming in and out is not filtered by anything. They're dependent on weather, especially wind. The wind might be blowing air into the room, or it might be sucking it out, or more likely it's not really doing anything because it's going along the building. And whether or not, or how much air comes in or goes out of the room through windows is totally unpredictable and constantly changing. Second, third, if they're only in one wall, which I think is the most common configuration in schools, all the windows on one wall, then there's no cross ventilation or ventilation blowing across the room from one wall to another. And lastly, the outdoor air may be polluted, or it might be too warm or cool, so you have to close the windows. This is a really important thing lately because of wildfire smoke, which forces you to close the windows in some parts of the country. Okay. If you do have windows and they open, these diagrams will suggest how the configuration of the windows matters. Think of each little blue house as actually a blue classroom. And starting from the left, the first one says good. It really should say pretty good because it's not great. But just one window open or windows in one wall, you can see from the little yellow arrow that air will come in and it will go out the same window. And depending on wind or whatever, it might not circulate hardly at all in the room. You can see it just do a U-turn and go back out. So that's not really helping the room much. A little bit better is if the windows are on different walls. And on this second blue classroom, they're on adjacent walls, and the air will come in one, and it might circulate a teeny bit before it's drawn out the other, or it might stay predominantly in the corner between those windows. You can see by the small yellow thickening line between them, that's supposed to be the circulation in the room. Just a little bit more than with one window. The third one shows two windows on opposite walls, and that's, it says best. It's really second best. And you can see the air being drawn all the way across the room by the second window allows more circulation, and that's indicated in the drawing, a little oddly, by a larger yellow blob of air that's able to move around the room a bit. And the best one on the far right is windows that are not lined up. They are on opposite sides of the room, but one's towards the left, one's towards the right. So the air has to take a crooked path across the room, and that makes it spread out more, circulate in the room. And I think that drawing's a little hard to read. So I found this other one, put it below that drawing, showing an aerial view, shows the crooked path more clearly. And you can see those little blue stars around the line suggest that that might be where the air circulation arrows would really go. So I don't know how many classrooms would have a thing like that, an arrangement like that, but it's good if they do. Another thing is fans and windows. Here's some don'ts and do's. The big don't is something that sort of by common sense we think to do, and you see this very commonly, is to put an intake fan, drawing the air in one window and an exhaust fan in the other, which just means turning them opposite ways, turning one fan to blow in and one fan to blow out. But it doesn't work well, as what can often happen is that the air, the lawnmower guy, you will only be a minute, the air coming in will be seduced by the air going out and just tend to flow right along that wall between the windows. And we call that short circuiting. So it'll just go from one fan to the other and not circulate so much into the room. The other don't is having a small fan in a big window, or in fact, even a big fan in a big window. If there's space around the fan, that will cause a different kind of short circuiting under some conditions, where the air will come in and then just go right back out again around the fan. Okay, so if you're using fans like a big box fan, a square fan in a big square rectangular window, that's good, but you should put like a cardboard mantle around it. You can put together fairly easily to make sure that the whole window area is enclosed, and then the fan will blow right back out again. The air coming in will blow right back out. So the suggestion down below, the do, is no matter which walls have windows, just use an exhaust fan and allow other open windows to draw the air in naturally from wherever they are. One last thing about pedestal fans or standing fans in a room. A lot of people like to have them. They can make a nice breeze, circulate the air well in the room, and make it more comfortable. But the thing you have to watch for when you have COVID, where people are the source of the virus, if there's anyone infected in the room unmasked, you don't want to blow the air from one person's breathing zone or their face to another person's face for obvious reasons. So you have to pay attention to where the fan is placed and where the airflow, you could picture the arrows like in some of the diagrams, where those arrows are going to blow the air, and make sure they're not doing that, blowing it from one person to another. The HVAC system, I'm just going to touch on really quick. And this is a diagram of one. And the main thing, you can't see my pointer, right? Is that right? You can't see my cursor?
We can. I can see your cursor.
Oh, you can?
Yes.
Oh, okay. That makes it so much easier. Okay. So what an HVAC generally is, it has somewhere, usually on the roof or in a service unit near the roof, a big box, and in the box is a few things. There's a general dust filter here for the air coming in. Then this was a bigger filter, and then some heater and cooling or both elements. And then the round thing is the fan. So the air comes in on the left, goes through the filter and the air heat and cool, and then the fan blows it out. Oops, didn't mean to move that. blows it out the supply duct. That supply duct will branch and go to everywhere in the school that it's going to feed to, ideally to every classroom. The other end of the fan is really important because the question is, where is the air coming from that comes into that box? Start it back up. Okay, this one shows the duct on the top is labeled return air, and that means return air from all the rooms that received air from this unit. So that's being recirculated back into the fan. Now, if we have pollutants like COVID in there that aren't necessarily caught by the filters in these units, which they usually are not, then that recirculated air is going to have COVID in it, and it's going to go back and get recirculated to the whole school. The lower duct here, with the lighter color or the reddish color, is fresh air. And this diagram shows by the size of the arrows and the size of the ducts that return air coming in is greater volume than fresh air coming in. And that's the opposite of what we want with COVID. We want to maximize the fresh air and minimize the recirculated air. Ideally, it would be 100% fresh air, but that never happens because then they'd have to cool and heat it so much and break the budget. So that's basically how an HVAC system functions. Okay, I'm going to skip the weeds on this issue and just go to the common asks. The most important asks, if you have an HVAC system and you want to make sure things are functioning maximally for COVID, these would be the asks. The most possible, maximum possible outside air, the best filters the system can handle, and I'm not going to go into here what MERV is. The best filter it can handle is a function of the fan, because the better the filter, the finer the filter, the more work it takes for the fan to blow air through it. So if the fan is not the fan is not designed to blow through a HEPA filter, the best filter you can get, which we'll talk about in a minute, then you can't put that in. So you want to get the best possible filter the system can handle, but that's not necessarily a great filter. You want to be sure it operates all day and it's not turned off and on by some measurement device like a CO2 meter or by temperature. And finally, you want to demand regular documented inspection and maintenance. Okay. If anybody has questions about HVAC, I know this is really, really, really brief. I'll have a question period at the end. And also, I'm making the paper I wrote about this, which is kind of a manual for workers for teachers and parents and community, how to find what you need in your school, how to figure out what you need in your school and what to demand. And it'll go into much more detail. So the third one, we did windows and briefly HVAC. And the third kind of ventilation common in schools is called unit ventilators, which means basically one ventilator per classroom. And these are just examples of two. On the one on the left, you can see there's a sort of dark space under it, and that's the return air coming from the room going back into this thing. There's a fan in it which will blow it up, and it'll come out the top in this model. Sometimes one of the problems is that people put stuff on top of them and block that. This model is more recent and better in that it has the air coming out here so that whatever you put on top isn't going to block that. But the other problem the big one you can't see in the picture is there's supposed to be outside air coming in the back. And there's fresh air louvers to let it in, but not if there's no hole in the outside wall. And very often these are installed without cutting through the wall, or there's a hole in the wall for the outside air, but the louvers are closed. In either case, you get no outside air. And so all you have is it's recirculating air coming in the bottom and blowing out the top. It's basically not doing it. Okay, here's a diagram of it. On the left is the outside wall of the school. And these are louvers which are happily open, fresh air louvers. And this arrow going in shows outside air coming in. And then it goes through a little filter. And these are crummy little filters that are just for gross dust to protect the fan, really, not anywhere near, particles thousands of times bigger than COVID aerosols. And then the fan will blow the air here through a heating or cooling thing and then out. So that And then back in the bottom, as we saw in the picture of the unit, the return air comes in the bottom. So the outside air and the return air mix and go up through the fan and out. Okay. Problems, I think I've mentioned them all. They often have little or no fresh air coming in. The filters are only for gross dust. They don't have enough airflow. Usually they have about a maximum of 1/3 of what's needed for COVID. And materials on the top can block circulation. There's a lot of problems with that. And I know from experience too, often, I didn't mention this in the slideshow, but often the insides of it are filthy. They don't bother to clean the louvers, either set, the return air or the outside air louvers. And so the air coming through is full of allergens and dirt, and maybe dead insects and whatever, and can cause respiratory problems. So here's one more diagram. Up here is a diagrammatic thing of the flow from the univent, and it's showing the arrows. Most of them are not going that far because the fan isn't powerful enough. A few arrows manage to circulate in the room. So there's not enough airflow to do too much good. They're primarily a heater and cooling unit. This one just shows junk on the top, covering up. You can sort of see the little black in there, covering up where the airflow should be coming out. A little bit here is clear. And this one shows the filter, which you can get an idea is the kind you can buy at Home Depot or some store that is just a gross dust filter. So with all those three kinds of ventilation that schools usually have, windows, univents, or HVAC, or that they usually don't have operative systems or adequate ones, what do? Here's what we do. First priority in most cases is going to be trying to get HEPA filtered air purifying units in every classroom. And in the next slide, I'll tell you what HEPA means if you're not familiar. But before we do, I just want you to notice in the picture that the contaminated air, the COVID in it, comes in one side of the unit, and then it comes out clean. In this model, it comes out on the other side through that filter. Other models, it comes out the top. Those are basically the only two configurations that I've seen anyway of HEPA filtered units. Okay, so what's HEPA mean? HEPA filters are really fine filters that can capture very tiny particles. We're talking like a millionth of a meter size particles. And that includes aerosols, including COVID aerosols. The word stands for high efficiency particulate air, which is another way of saying very fine filter. So that's what we want, HEPA filters. Okay, there's a few things to consider if you're ever in the stage of your struggle for ventilation where you're choosing what air purification units to get. Here are a few considerations. The first one is the capacity. The goal by all of the big air and health organizations now and ventilation organizations all agree now that for COVID bioaerosols, COVID or other virus particles, we need 6 air changes per hour. An air change is the air delivered in the volume of the room. For example, if the classroom has 1,000 cubic feet, and that's the volume, you need 6,000 cubic feet of filtered air or fresh air every hour. But in the case of these, it's filtered air because we're talking about a HEPA filtered unit. So you need to know the volume of the room and the capacity of the thing, the unit, to figure out if it's going to be giving you 6 air changes per hour. And it might be that each room requires more than one. In fact, it would be very odd to have only one. Of course, it's going to be a budget consideration how many you have. Left out one. The second consideration is noise. It's a real problem, practical problem. Is you usually have 3 speeds, and very often the high speed is really loud. And what happens? Teachers end up turning them off because they don't want to shout over them. So the whole struggle for a filtered air purifier comes to nothing if we don't have it on. So ideally, one looks for the quietest model, one where the high speed can be tolerated. And if not, if it's going to be used on medium speed, then your capacity figuring, your little math you have to do, is going to have to be taking into account the airflow, the air capacity at medium speed. So you need to figure out how much capacity each one will give you at the speed you're actually going to be using it. And from a health point of view, the noise should be less than 40 decibels. You just have to find out from the manufacturer, if they tell you that, how loud they are. So it's a very important practical consideration. The last thing and the hardest one to talk about is where do you put them in the room? And unfortunately, every room is different in terms of airflow patterns and things, you know, mobile blackboards or whatever objects are in the room affecting the airflow in the room. So there's no general rule to say, but there's a few things to consider. And I think the basic thing is to always keep in mind visualizing the airflow. Visualize arrows around the room. Where's the air going? What's blocking it? So you can kind of have an idea of the airflow, and you want to take that into account in these ways. In most cases, you want to keep the windows and the doors closed because they're going to provide a completely unpredictable and varying airflow in the room. And any way that you place the filters is going to have it need to be moving them around all the time. Like when the air comes in from the window, whoops, get the HEPA filter away from the window. You don't want to clean the window with clean air. And so if you have more than one, ideally, then having them around the room, scattered in as close to some kind of circular type pattern is best. And keeping them a few feet off the floor, if practical, is really good, because just think about all the students are sitting there at their desks or standing around, and their face is 3 to 5 feet from the floor. So you want to generate a flow of clean air in that altitude range where their faces are. So lifting these things up off the floor, if they're not 3 or 4 feet high already, and blowing it out the top, that may be good. But you want to think about, again, where are those arrows? Where's that air going? And in thinking of the arrows, you want, if you have 2 units, you want to make sure they don't interfere with each other. For example, you wouldn't want to have them on opposite sides of a room pointing at each other, blowing the air at each other, because they'll kind of sabotage each other's flow. Better to have them both pointed in the same direction through the room. Okay, whoops. And a couple of don'ts is don't do anything that's going to obstruct either the inlet where the air comes in or the outlet where the air comes out of the unit. So they should be at least 1 or 2 feet from walls or objects. They should never be under a table or in a corner, and they should never be near an open door or window. So you avoid just cleaning already clean air. Okay. So it's not always obvious. This picture raises questions to me. Is this 1 unit enough in this room? And is it well placed? And we can't answer these because we don't have enough information, but it's how you should be thinking about it. Like, is that unit too far away from those students? And why is it not in the middle? Why is it facing one row where the guy is and not this row where the woman is? Why isn't it in the middle? I don't know what their considerations were in this room, but those are the kind of questions you should be asking to yourself. Move it around, thinking arrows, thinking airflow. Okay, and this is just to illustrate what one classroom did. This was an experiment, actually. This was a classroom, and you can see all these things are rows of desks. Along this wall on the top of the picture are all windows, and they're all closed. And down here is a door, and it's closed. And so there's no ventilation in the room except 4 HEPA units. The green circles are the HEPA units. And they put those on. I have no other information about capacity or anything, but they did find in this particular experiment with this room and these units that 90% of all particles were cleared from everywhere in the room within 30 minutes. Okay, we don't usually have research that's going to tell us that, but you can see they're scattered around the room, which is good. If you only had 2, my best bet would be to place them here and here, or maybe on the diagonal here and here, here, it just depends. You have to kind of picture the airflow, try to get the air through the room as much as possible. And there's no easy answer. It's just your best thoughts on airflow. And this is a little pop quiz if anybody wants to say anything. What's good in this setup and how could it be improved? Does anybody want to say what is good of the protections available here?
So this is Gretchen. I don't think the audience can answer in the webinar, but I can take a shot if you want.
Sure.
I'll
answer my own question.
So the placing of the HEPA filter looks like it's too close to the wall, and it's just not. It looks like it should be placed in a more central part of the classroom, for one thing.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
And I'm not sure if this is accurate based on, because I've been taking notes as I'm watching, but having the windows open and also running the HEPA filter is counterproductive. Is that right?
Yep. Usually. And what about the two windows?
Oh, they're just basically switching air out, like it's just pulling the fresh air right back outside.
Yeah, because they have two fans, an intake fan here and an exhaust fan here, and they're showing arrows going this way, but more likely what would happen is they'd go this way. Yeah. Gotcha. The good thing though, you see anything good in the room?
I mean, the desks are spaced apart. There are, you know, there is the exhaust fan and the HEPA filter, even if they're not in the exact right place, but.
Right. And they're wearing masks too.
Well, yes.
So it looks like they're wearing cloth masks, but can't really say. The ones in the back are white. You can't really see anything. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So that's how you want to be thinking, looking at the configuration. What would be better? Shut these fans off probably and move the HEPA to a more central place. Yeah. Okay. So the paper I'm making available to you all in the resources that Megan's going to be putting together will have much more detail on ventilation and HVACs and a whole sort of manual on how to proceed in working on getting ventilation in the school. Okay, so we're not going to do question and answer, right, Gretchen?
Yeah, when you are done, is this your last slide?
It's the last slide on ventilation, and I have a short presentation on masks.
Okay, so if you want to go ahead and do the mask presentation, and then we will just, we'll take over the screen and we'll both be on the screen and we can do a question and answer session.
Okay, or is there a chat? People could write in the chat too.
Yeah, if people want to write in, there's a Q&A at the bottom of the screen. If people want to write questions.
Oh yeah, that would be good.
And then as well.
I can't
and then
see
I have a list of questions that our community has been sending us the last few days. So
maybe I can answer some. We'll see.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'll move ahead to masks. This one's much shorter, it's less techy. Okay, I think this will be obvious why we need them, because even if you have gotten good ventilation, lots of air purifying units, an infected student without a mask can still infect nearby students, and they can affect their families. So we need all the layers of protection possible. One thing that people, I think, forget all the time or don't know is students or teachers may not know they're infected. 40% in many studies, the average is 40% of infected people have no symptoms. And there's a new study, it's the small one, it's not peer reviewed yet, but 50% may be asymptomatic with Omicron. So if you have people if their choice of wearing a mask is based on whether they have symptoms, that doesn't cut it, because almost half or even half of them won't have symptoms when they are infected. So masks are really important. So I'm going to dive right into the types of masks. The best ones from a filtering point of view are N95s. And they're more than masks, they're actually respirators. And a respirator is a mask that has the ability to create an airtight seal with the face, which other masks don't. Okay, so they do that. They have very high quality filter material like a HEPA filter. And the reason they can get the tight seal is because they have two straps, and I'm sure you've all seen them, which can hold the mask much tighter against your face than ear loops can. They come in several shapes, so they fit many kinds of faces. And they're really important and good for people who have special vulnerabilities or medical conditions. Either they can't be vaxxed, or they're immunocompromised, or some other reason, including kids who need extra protection. The main problem with them is they can be hard to breathe through. I personally find them hard to breathe through. I have a little bit of compromised lungs. So I have them, but I really hardly ever wear them. So what else is good? Oh, still on them, sorry. They have the tight seal because of the two straps. If they're worn correctly, which means basically one strap above the ear and one below the ears. And then they come in these different styles, this sort of three-part style, the cup-shaped style and the duckbill style. There might be some other ones too. So the next best, which are probably the most useful for what we're talking about, which is daily moderate exposures or everyday moderate exposures. They also have good tested filter material. And they tend to fit well. They're well designed, and they fit the face without gaps. And not necessarily airtight, but without gaps. So you're getting much less air coming around the edges than you would with other kinds of masks. And many people, including myself, find them comfortable and easier to breathe through than N95s. And for our purposes, they come in children's sizes. And they come in colors and patterns, which just might appeal to some kids. And you can see some absolutely gorgeous kids with their masks. These two are N95s. And they all have more or less the same shape with the central crease. And the KF94s, there's different models, but they're all designed to be sort of boxy. They come out at the top, over the nose part, then down, and then they have another facet going back. And the advantage is that they barely touch your mouth, so when you breathe. If they're fitting well, they might touch a little bit. I find when I breathe in through it, it sucks it in a little bit, and it might touch my mouth, but just a little. So they're real comfortable because you've got like an air pocket around you. Okay, so those N95s are the best. The KN95 and KF94 are the next best. Good is to have a combination of a cloth mask over a surgical mask, because dropping first to surgical masks, they have a good filter material, but they have such a gap at the cheeks. I mean, some people are able to get around it by knotting the thing, but it doesn't work on everybody's face. That usually about 25% of the air breathed in or out leaks. So they're really not a useful mask at all by themselves. Why they're allowed in hospitals is beyond me. But better than that, going back up again, is the cloth mask over the surgical mask, because the surgical mask is a good filter, and the cloth mask, if it fits properly, may hold down the gaps on the side. Cloth masks by themselves really are not useful for COVID because aerosols go right through them. So which mask is best for your child? The best mask is the one that fits snugly against the face and is comfortable. Okay, it's not a technical issue. This mask is wearable. If it fits well and you're comfortable in it, then that's the right mask. So my suggestion to find them is to start with ordering masks in small quantities and try a couple styles till you find the best one. That's expensive, but my thought is that people could work in groups and buy a handful of styles, pooling the cost, and then try the different styles. So that's one thought. But I think the next talk, or talk and a half, talk after me, after the next one, is going to address how to get them. This is really important too. Doesn't matter how you wear them. Of course, if it's under the nose, it offers no protection. I have seen countless pictures of kids wearing cloth masks under the nose. They may as well not wear a mask. It's pointless. both that it's cloth and that it's under the nose. And then if you don't press the nose piece to your face, you'll have gaps next to your nose. And even the way you do it, you should press it from top to bottom, because if you press it from bottom to top, you squeeze it to a point and you create a little gap above the bridge of your nose. Most people don't pay attention. In N95s, the straps should be on correctly. And in any case, follow the manufacturer's instruction. They tell you exactly how to put it on, but you do have to read it. Okay. Another important practical issue is how long can you wear it? You don't have to throw them out every day. You can reuse them for many, many hours before discarding. You only need to discard if the mask is visibly stained, soiled, frayed, wet, or the straps are loose. Then you should toss it. You should not wash them. That's something a lot of people don't realize. Washing damages the filter material. So, and don't spray them with disinfectant. A friend of mine just told me she did that. I'm just about free. Because disinfectants are toxic, and you're putting them on the mask and breathing them in. That's a real no-no. Okay, here's another really practical, serious problem. Most of the masks on the internet are fake, which means they're not a tested filter material. So how can you tell? Nearly all N95s have head straps. So if you see one with ear loops, it's probably fake. And you'll notice if you start looking up N95s on the internet, most of them have ear loops. And they're fake. So the way you tell is simply you look at the markings on them. If they are N95s and approved by NIOSH, which is the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, and they are the group, the government group that is supposed to test masks, they have to have this information, a testing and certification, or a TC approval number, and it will be like this, TC and then blah, blah. I just made up those digits, but it'll have like digits and numbers in the dash, be in that form. That should be printed on the mask, as well as the part number, N95, NIOSH, and a lot number. So there's like 5 things that should be printed on the mask. Okay. This information is in a PCDC mask sheet that I wrote most of, and you'll find it in the reference materials. And the same with this. The same thing goes with KN95s. They're made in China, and KF94s are made in Korea. They're not NIOSH approved because NIOSH doesn't approve masks made in other countries, or with the made to the standards of other countries. So they're tested in China or Korea. I don't have detailed information if those tests are as rigorous as NIOSH's tests, but apparently people who have tested them here independently have been satisfied that they are. And to tell you how to read them, it's the same sort of thing, and where to get them, it's the same sort of thing. You need to see what's either for the Korean ones, KF94s, the material is printed on the package, and with the KN95s, it's printed on the respirator, like with our American ones, on the mask. So you would go to this fact sheet called, or info sheet called Mask Up at the PCDC website. You go to the website, you click on resources, you click on info sheets, and the Mask Up one is the first one that comes up. So I think that'll be in your reference material. Okay, so that is what I have.
Danielle Peterson is a Marketplace and Sourcing Director for ProjectN95. ProjectN95 works to provide equitable access for all to affordable respiratory protection. Danielle's roles include overseeing sourcing, supplier and product vetting, logistics, and marketplace teams. Today, Danielle is going to be speaking to us about how to properly fit pediatric masks.
Hi, my name is Danielle and I'm the Director of Sourcing and Vetting at ProjectN95. We're a national nonprofit that works to provide equitable access to safe and vetted masks and PPE. I'm here today to talk to you about how to choose a mask that works for your child. Masks help to reduce the spread of COVID-19, and right now with higher transmission rates across the country, wearing a mask indoors and in public places especially in larger crowds, can help your kids to stay safe from COVID-19. When speaking about masks, there are 3 key principles, especially for kids. There's fit, there's filtration, and then there's comfort. I think with kids especially, we often hear about fit and filtration, but comfort is really important because any mask that your kid is wearing needs to stay on their face in order for it to be effective. And so it's really about finding a mask that you can actually wear for a long period of time. Going back into the school year, I think it's especially important, because many schools are not requiring masks, and you may be in a situation where you feel that your kid really does need to be wearing a mask, and that's part of why you're here. So I'm going to start off, I'm going to kind of take you through the fit, filtration, and comfort aspects of a mask and how to find a mask that has high filtration, how to find a mask that fits, and how to find one that's actually comfortable. So let's start with high filtration masks. Basically, I want to give a quick overview to let you know that one of the things that I think a lot of parents have difficulty with is finding a high filtration mask for their children because there isn't a US standard for high filtration kids masks. In the US, we have a standard for adults, which is the N95. You've probably heard of it. But there is not equivalent standard available for children in the US. So I just want to start out though and say, if you have a middle school aged kid who maybe is growing a bit more, is in between sizes, isn't necessarily wearing adult sizes yet, they may actually fit into a size small N95 mask. So if that's something that's interesting to you, you should go ahead and look for some small N95 mask options that may fit well for your kid. Now just going into some different options though for high filtration masks, there are specific types that you should be looking for in order to ensure that you're finding something that is legitimate and that is not counterfeited. So number 1, KF94s are a good mask option for children who are looking for something that's higher filtration. This is a mask that is created to the Korean civilian mask standard, and it has a minimum filtration rate of 94%. These are really good because the standard actually has specific standards for masks in smaller sizes that work well for kids. So when you're looking for these masks, you could look for, you're looking for either a kid's mask, it may say youth, it may say small, or it may say extra small. So extra small masks are going to be best for kids under 5, small masks are probably going to be best for kids 5 to 10. If you have a kid who's, again, in that in-between stage, they may want to try out a medium KF94 that's similar to what a small N95 size would be, so it could be a good option for them. Beyond KF94s, an additional mask I'm sure you hear about all the time is the KN95. This is a high filtration mask that is made to a Chinese mask standard that is supposed to have a minimum of a 95% filtration rate. I think what we've seen pretty consistently throughout the pandemic is that it is hard to understand if you're getting a legitimate KN95 on the market because KN95s are not regulated in the same way that a KF94 or an N95 is regulated by the government. And so these companies that are making KN95s they're not being audited by government entities. And so it's hard to know if what you're getting is something that's safe. So we recommend always taking a few different steps to make sure you're getting something that is going to work for you. So 1, I recommend purchasing from a reputable source. So I'm just going to say this now, ProjectN95 does have a marketplace. We do vet all of the masks on our site, and we do perform testing on the KN95s that we carry, and we do that in order to ensure that what we're getting and giving out to people is safe and it meets the filtration rate that's required. Additionally, if you're looking to get a mask from another source, there's 2 different sites that you could look at. So one is Erin Collins, the Mask Nerd, and another is Armbrust. And on these 2 sites, both of these organizations do testing and reviews for masks, and so they have, specific testing procedures that they're following in order to help you figure out if a mask has a high filtration rate, and I think it can help you to avoid counterfeits, so that's a good option. Finally, I also would recommend some US-made kids masks. So basically you're going to see there's a lot of ear loop disposable masks out on the market. And essentially you want to make sure you're actually buying these from a reputable source and a manufacturer. So what I would recommend is actually, if you're going to go and buy a kids mask like that isn't made to a specific standard, is to look for something that's actually made by someone like an N95 manufacturer in the United States. Someone like that has so many different audits and controls and processes in place in their organization for their N95s that this is usually a good sign that they're going to be putting that same level of detail and work into any mask that they are creating. So I'd recommend taking a look at those organizations. Some of those that I know of include Dematec, Agley, Protective Health Gear, and United States Mask, but there's a few others that are doing this too. Okay, now that we've talked about filtration, but I think the next most important thing that we need to talk about is fit. So what are you looking for when you're trying to figure out if a mask will fit for your kid? Number one, you should go ahead and take a look at the age range provided on the site for the mask, if that's available. That's going to, obviously be some clear and easy information for you. Additionally, if that information isn't given, or even if it is, I'd recommend taking a look at customer reviews and seeing what people say about the mask. Sometimes a mask will say it's good for kids 5 to 12, but that's a pretty big age range, and you're probably going to want to understand, if you have a smaller 5-year-old, is this mask going to work well on them? So I'd recommend looking to see what other people are saying. An additional tip is to try out an adjustable mask. So adjustable masks often have an adjustable ear loop, and that's going to help you to get a more secure fit and help make sure that mask actually is fitting your kid. And those masks really fit a much wider range of face sizes, and so I think that's one of the reasons why they're a good option, because if you order it, it's more likely that it's going to fit your child. Additionally, flat fold masks, which are masks that fold in half and they're flat, those are another good option if you're not sure what size to look for. Those masks, basically when you put them on, they just kind of conform to your face, and so they do fit a variety of faces pretty well, so that's another recommendation we have. I think finally, just making sure that prior to the school year, you're actually trying out the mask is pretty key, and trying it out for a period of time so your kid can see how the fit is going and if they are comfortable and able to keep it on their face for a long time. I also just don't want to leave out people who have kids who are maybe in an in-between age, are a little bit older, and maybe don't know what the perfect mask fit is for them. For kids like that who may have outgrown kids masks but haven't really moved into adult sizes, there are a few different things you could look for. One, you could look for a small KN95. 2, you could look for a small N95 mask. Or 3, you could look for a medium-sized KF94 mask. The medium in the KF94 is actually most similar to a small adult mask in the US market. Now that we've talked about fit and filtration, I want to go into comfort, because I think that for all parents, this is probably pretty key. If your kid isn't wearing a mask, the mask isn't working, right? So I think this is really important, and I'm going to go through some of the biggest problems that we hear about. So number one is we often hear that the mask can get hot and humid throughout the day. Kids have to sit in a classroom all day, and that's always difficult. And so for that type of situation, we recommend trying out what's called a boat-shaped or 3D type mask. It's going to have a bigger pocket in the front, and that pocket's going to make it a little bit easier for your child to be able to get some air, extra air in the mask. And what that allows the air to do is when you breathe out, it allows the air that's in that front part of the mask to cool down before it reaches your face again. So that's going to help keep your kid a little bit cooler. It makes the mask feel a little bit more breathable. Second problem I want to go over is your ears hurting after a few hours. Especially if you have a kid that has earaches or has ear problems already, they're probably going to experience ear pain when they're wearing an ear loop mask for a long period of time. So there's a few tips and tricks that I think you hear often, but Basically, one is they do sell mask extenders, so you can get something to clip your ear loop mask in the back to make it a head strap mask. You could buy a head strap mask for your kid. I also have some other suggestions. So one, getting an adjustable ear loop mask can be good, just because your kid can adjust it a bit throughout the day. So if it's getting irritating, they can just loosen it up a bit and make it a little more comfortable. Additionally, you could look for a mask that has comfortable ear loops. So two that I'd recommend for kids are the Armbrust KN95 and the Dematec DX95. You know, I've worn the adult versions of those masks personally. I get the ear pain problem, and I find that they're ones that I can wear for a very long period of time, 8 hours plus, and that's really what you're looking for. Problem number 3, I personally don't have kids, but I've heard this from a lot of people. Kids drool, they have snot, they have food particles, coming out of their mouth. Basically, they could be dropping a mask on the ground. After a few hours, no matter how careful your kid is, they may be getting that mask a little bit too dirty. And, I think at the end of the day, when it comes to comfort, if your mask is soaking wet, you're probably not going to be that comfortable in that mask. For situations like that, I think it's really important to make sure to send your kid to school with multiple mask replacements. And, you should probably go out and find something that, is a little bit cheaper, so that you can feel comfortable doing that. At the end of the day, again, comfort matters, and that's why, you should try out the mask ahead of time. Try to have your kid try out the one they're going to wear for a longer period of time, just because, situations like this, masks get dirty, they aren't always going to stay as comfortable throughout the day, and you kind of want to know which one is going to have the staying power that your kid needs. So just want to do a quick final wrap up. It's just a reminder, when you're picking out a mask, the 3 things you should be thinking about for your child are fit, filtration, and comfort. Your kid needs to be comfortable wearing a mask in order for it to be effective. Do not discount this. You want to wear something that they're comfortable with. You want to get their buy-in. That's how you're going to get them to wear the mask. Additionally, I really recommend that you try the masks for an extended period of time before the first day of school. So go ahead and order your masks now, and when you have a time where you need to wear a mask for an extended period of time indoors, have your kid try it out. You want to know if their ears become uncomfortable under time, if the mask starts to feel irritating, or if they're not able to keep it on the whole day. That's probably a sign that it's not the right mask for them. So those are all of the tips. I just wanted to thank you for joining this conversation on masking, and I hope you were able to find some tips that will help you as you move into the new school year. Thank you.
Mandy Kaufman is an intern and advocate with long COVID families. She's a senior at the University of South Carolina and is majoring in public health. Today, Mandy is going to be showing us how to make a Corsi box.
Hi, my name is Mandy, and today I'll be building a Corsi box. So to make this, you will need 4 20 by 20 air filters, a 20 by 20 box fan, the cardboard box from the box fan, and some duct tape, and also some scissors. So the first thing I will be doing here is I will be taping the first 2 filters together, and make sure, so as you can see, both of the filters are going arrows pointing in. So I will be taping those together. And then we can move on with the next one. Also make sure it is facing inwards. Don't let it do that. So as you can see with my box so far, I have taped every single side together. One side is taped together on the inside, one on the outside on all 4 sides, so you keep that perfect square shape. I would also like to mention that all of the filters are vertical, so it prevents them from drooping over time. Next, you're going to put your air filters to the side, and you're going to find that box for the box fan we have, and you're going to cut around the perimeter so you have a cardboard square. You're going to take your cardboard and you're going to place it on top and tape it down with duct tape and make sure it is sealed. Alrighty, you can see my box now has 5 sides and the cardboard is on the inside and all the filters are facing in to the box. So next, you will be grabbing your box fan and you want to make sure all the air is being filtered out. So you're going to put it on top and all the air flows this way. So here is another angle of that. All the air is flowing up and out of the box up this way. You can see there are little gaps. When you put the fan on top, you're going to seal these up. So you can see here, I taped the fan on top and I sealed all the seams and I put duct tape and made sure every single corner is sealed. I also left out the cord and sealed that. To reduce the airflow going back into the filter, one thing you want to do is you want to cover the sides of the fan on all 4 sides with cardboard and tape it down. So right here, I have 4 corners cut out and each corner will go on each side of the fan.
My name is Ayan Moladina and I'm 12 years old and I live in Austin, Texas. I'm vaccinated and I mask up.
I'm Dr. Yenting Shen from California. I'm boosted and I wear the best mask to keep my newborn baby safe. Let's do this together.
Hi, my name's Gianna. I'm from Texas and I wear a mask to protect others.
Hi, I'm Kipper from Illinois. I got vaccinated and I masked up.
Hi, I'm Alex from California and I got vaccinated to help prevent the spread and mutation of COVID-19.
I'm Baron from California. I'm the founder of Teens for Vaccines and fully vaccinated against COVID-19.
It might not be you, but there's so many millions of people that are sick and need to be protected. So you can't just care about yourself. It's about caring for one another. We are meant to be in a group anyway, so let's care so we can enjoy it together.
My name is Kira Mooney. I'm from Massachusetts and I am vaccinated.
Deborah from Florida. I am vaccinated.
My name is Trenton Barfield. I'm from Louisiana and I got vaccinated to help stop the spread of COVID.
Andrea from Florida and I am vaccinated.
Hi, my name is Larry and we mask up here in Texas. Woo!
Hi, I'm Miskeen. Hi, I'm Jules. And I'm from Ohio. I'm from New Jersey. And we're vaccinated.
Jeanette and Xavier, Arleta, California. We are fully vaccinated.
I'm Kira from Seattle, and I got vaccinated to help my Seattle community.
We wear our masks to protect everyone, especially those who are immunocompromised, because no one is expendable. Health is a human right.
My name is Luke. I'm from Connecticut, and I am fully vaccinated.
Protect your loved ones and your friends. Wear a mask.
Micah, Maryland, I'm vaccinated.
This pandemic isn't about creating hatred and division. It's about expressing empathy and love for your fellow brothers and sisters.
My name is Blythe Bates, and I'm from Vermont.
I wear a mask to keep myself and others safe from COVID-19. I work at a school, and that's very important to me that we all stay safe.
You can play your part to help this pandemic by A, wearing a mask when you're near people or in rooms with other people that firmly goes over your nose and your mouth, and it's a good seal on it. And the second is social distancing and taking the vaccine if you're eligible.
The pandemic has affected all of us. Please, for the sake of the country, mask up and get vaccinated. We can get out of this terrible pandemic together.
Let's mask together, America. Masking's kind of cool.